Hi and welcome back. I'm going to take a look at whether or not we are indeed approaching the most dangerous point in history. And what I'm going to look at today is I'm going to look at the idea of whether or not we're at a tipping point and give you some alternative explanations for what a tipping point might actually be. I'm going to get into the depth of what constitutes danger in history and is whether or not this is a dangerous point. I'm going to outline some of the research that's influenced my thinking in this space before turning and having a look at some of the elements of the tipping point, which are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The idea of the tipping point was made popular by Malcolm Gladwell in his book of the same name. For me, it primarily combines two well-known effects or two well-known phenomena, one of them drawing from ancient history, and that's the idea of the Sisyphus effect. Sisyphus was a mythological figure who was tasked to push a large rock up a hill. And that's kind of a way of looking at how wicked problems tend to build over time. They're very substantial things that are going on, very substantial effects that are going on, but it's like somebody's pushing them up the hill towards the peak, trying to get them noticed. So very heavy, lots and lots of mass, a great deal involved in them. And then you get to the top. You get to what Gladwell calls the tipping point, also known as an inflection point by some people. What then happens there is that in physics, if it's a physical system, gravity takes over. And all of these effects, all of these issues that are going on all come together. And you get this whole idea of what's referred to as the snowball effect. And we've all seen what happens when you push a snowball down a hill. All of these things collect together. They begin to develop huge inertia, huge mass. You get acceleration, you get massive velocity as things combine, and you get one big major problem. Another way of looking at this idea is that there are a lot of lit fuses in the world. In other words, there's a lot of bombs of one form or another waiting to go off. There's issues around population migration as well as population rise, coupled to environmental degradation. Again, I've referred to this in other videos. Look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the UN have put together. They describe a lot of the problems that we're facing in the world. There is the issue of nuclear proliferation and the threat, indeed, or the veiled threat of nuclear war by Putin. Now, nuclear proliferation, we're seeing Australia acquiring nuclear subs. Is that a good idea? I'm actually not sure that it is, but time will tell. There's this notion that artificial intelligence is on the rise and becoming dangerous, and that's something certainly that some scientists have alluded to, the idea of killer robots wandering around. Now, at the moment, that's still in the realm of science fiction, but nevertheless, we're beginning to see advances in that field, and we need to take a look at the ethics of that whole area before very much longer. As we've just seen recently, there's a real problem with the rise in infectious diseases. I'm not sure we could withstand another pandemic just at this moment in time, but nevertheless, that's something that we need to be concerned about. Related to that's a real issue around drug resistance and the issues with a lot of diseases and infections becoming resistant, for example, to antibiotics. I've mentioned this before in other videos. There's the climate crisis is with us. Irrespective of the cause, we're seeing rises in global temperature, we're seeing glaciers melting, we're seeing rises in sea rise, we're seeing all sorts of weather being affected by changes in climate. It's time that we actually did something. I'm also afraid that there is a rash of selfishness in the world, exemplified in some of the political manoeuvring that we're seeing in both the US and the UK at the moment, which is rather unfortunate. There's kind of a loss of humility of our senior figures who should be leading the world when they're not. They're simply becoming self-interested, increasingly so. Only today, there's a report of in 20 or 30-year time, where we'll actually get either a near miss or something very destructive from an asteroid that's floating out there. It's the size, I think, of an Olympic swimming pool. That could do a lot of damage. The last time that the Earth was struck by an asteroid of any size was when the dinosaurs got wiped out. So there's something not to stay awake at night about. I talked about it a minute ago when I talked about the rise of selfishness. I'm afraid we're seeing an increase in tyrannical, self-absorbed leaders worldwide. We've seen significant problems in all of the major powers with people who frankly are not suitable to hold such positions of power being put in those positions of power simply by appealing to populist electorates that have put them in power because they think they're going to look after them, when in fact the leaders are simply only self-interested. And another video that'll be coming out soon will talk about the idea of toxic leadership and how we need to actually oppose that sort of thinking. In certain branches of the media, we're seeing a disconnection from reality. The truth is being distorted by people for their own ends. We're going back to this idea of poor leadership again. That's something that's of great concern, in that truth, whatever that is being mangled, and it's getting in the way of people's lives. And it's really causing issues with equality in the world, I think, is the greatest concern for me. It is a seriously wicked problem. Worldwide, there is inequality. We see that with the mass migrations of people out of countries where they're in absolutely dire circumstances, usually through hunger or usually through inaccessibility to water or simply good living conditions. These are all lit fuses, and when we put them together in an ecosystem of wicked problems, indeed, I can see a global Sisyphus pushing all of these problems up towards the top of the hill. And unless we get to grips effectively with some of them, we are going to have a real issue in the world. We're facing multiple tipping points across political, economic, social, technological, and environmental systems. The question is, are we reaching what a physicist might call a percolation threshold? What that refers to is the long-term connectivity within random systems. I've talked in a previous video about chaotic wicked problems. A lot of these are chaotic wicked problems. What happens when we get interconnection between different elements of different wicked problems is this idea of a percolation effect, which builds pressure within the system. Think of Sisyphus actually pushing that rock up the hill. So what happens as the percolation builds and we get to the summit is that the percolation ceases and we get the snowball effect. The coffee boils over in the coffee percolator. There's an unfortunate human tendency to treat the world as a only very loosely connected set of discrete systems. And we see that in economic theory, for example, where financial economy is divorced from the world economy. Now, the work of people like Robert Costanza demonstrates to us that we have intimately interconnected systems. Economy is connected to planetary systems, whether we like it or not. Economy is connected to society, whether we like it or not. Society is connected to technology. Society is connected to economy. Society is connected to the environment. Technology, you get my point. We are in an intimately interconnected ecosystem in which everything plays into everything else. The best example of that is Gaia theory, which tells us that the world is a large, intimately interconnected ecosystem, and that what we do in one sphere of that ecosystem affects elements in other parts of the ecosystem. So the most dangerous thing in the world at the moment is the rise of autocracy and the alt-right. People seem to be wanting to reclaim some mythical racial or economic status that they thought they held previously in the world and which they think they've lost. My thinking in this space is supported by the work of people like Malcolm Gladwell. His book, The Tipping Point, is particularly good and particularly well researched. There's also the work of the late, great Sir James Lovelock, who wrote on Gaia theory extensively. Robert Costanza, who's written about ecological economics and the interconnectedness of everything within the world. And then there's the work of Barry Turner on how we develop man-made disasters. I've also followed the work of Noam Chomsky for many years. If we want just briefly to think about the threats to mankind, the best place really to go and look is the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Each of those 17 goals describes a major substantial problem. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the climate crisis is one, poverty is another, inequality in education is another, health is another. And what's interesting is the 17th is the problem of trying to get everybody to work with everybody else. If we're going to deal with the dangers that Chomsky is pointing out, that's the place where we really need to start. If you've found the video interesting, please do subscribe to the channel. If you want to get an assessment of where you are in your work life in position of all of this doom and gloom, then please take my quiz, or simply click on any of the links below to get more of the information that I put into the public domain.